Maybe it's like painfully obvious, but I feel like bringing the episode in on track one feels great.
Sure.
And so imagining that at least a part of track one has been playing along. I still don't know yet. I'll have to see after it's done if I can fit how many full tracks I can fit in. But I sure don't mind having it be a taste, and then that hopefully only drives people even more to go get the album, you know?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So if we did that Campbell's Farewell to Red Gap set that it opens with, I'd probably play it right up until stuff like starts taking off when it scoops into this is it the second tune, Carmichael Gal?
That's it. Yeah, with the fiddle coming in.
Yes. So as that kind of scoops in, then I'll start kind of fading it out, and we'll come into the conversation. And speaking of that tune, like far be it for me, Tim, to make any sort of like declaration about your musical career, of course. But for me, when the first time I listened to this album, this first track just felt like kind of like magic. It felt kind of like something was coming full circle. And I certainly don't mean that to say, oh, this is Tim's last album. Don't let it be, please. But something seemed like it was coming full circle. And I was thinking about why that is. And I think it's because the first I ever heard you play was a set you did at Squeeze the Bag in 2010 or 2011. There's a video of it on YouTube, and you're playing, one of the tunes is Campbell's Farewell to Red Gap.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's probably why in my brain it was like, we've like arrived somehow. Was that in mind at all? Like, how long have you been playing this tune? Is this just a favorite that you had to get on the album, or is that by chance?
You know, that's a great question. This was one that I kind of think at one point I had intended to put it on the previous Appalachian themed album, the Piper and the Holler.
Yeah.
And somehow it got lost or forgotten or something. And I was sort of kicking myself for years that I never thought to put that. It was such an obvious contender to put on that album because it is an existing tune in the Appalachian tradition, and the Scottish precedent, of course, is still very popular. Campbell's Farewell to Red Castle.
Right, yeah.
The two-parted tune. So I've known about this for a number of years, known the tune and learned the southern version from Pete Sutherland probably around 2006 or 7, somewhere around there. It is, I had kind of forgotten that I had played that at Shepherdstown. That was probably a decade ago now.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny that, like, I know that, like, of course, once an artist puts something out there, they don't really have a lot of control about how it interacts with the people who interact with it, right?
Right.
Well, for me, though, that performance, like, that was my introduction to, like, up until that performance, me watching that, all my bagpiping had been very, uh, in a way, disconnected. Like, I mean, I don't mean to say that like you can't enjoy the tradition of any other geographical region. And of course, I'm not in the eastern United States either, if we're going to talk about geographical regions, right? But it was
Mm-hmm.
always music of another land that I'd never visited.
Mm-hmm.
And that performance was when I went, hey, this is my music, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big deal for me, and I listened to it a lot. And honestly, that set kind of lives in my head now. And so it was an immediate connection for me when I listened to track one on this album.
Huh. Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, it is. It is quite something. Those of us here in the U.S. and I suppose Canada too, and other far-flung nations that are not the British Isles, to be, holding on so tightly to these Scottish tunes and these traditions, some of which are contrived or distorted or amplified in
Mythologized or
some way.
something.
Exactly, and then kind of realizing that our own nation has its own tradition, or often a plural of them, multiple traditions. And do we have to only play what has come through the Scottish side, those of us playing Scottish pipes, or for Irish pipers, just the Irish tunes and Irish way of playing? Or is there another option, a way for us to be more ourselves in a way?
And there is something, I mean, like, I'm all for appreciating other cultures, of course, but there is something special about being, the word isn't ownership quite, I don't think, but there's something about, it feels, it's almost like speaking your native language. Like if you've been learning a second language, and sometimes that makes your brain tired, and it just feels really good to settle back into your native tongue, you know?
Yes. Yeah, that's a really interesting comparison. I like that a lot. Though, depending on how long you've been playing in the Scottish tradition, for people of, playing Scottish pipes, if you've been doing that for decades, to try to kind of undo that, or learn how to speak, if you've been speaking with a Scottish accent for decades, and suddenly you're like, well, oh, I also have this American accent that I can use, kind of to recapture that, or reconfigure that, takes some work and thought.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, so speaking, so this sort of weird little connection that we're making to language and accents. I don't know. Let's riding that train a little further. In that opening tune, track one, that goes from, when it goes from Campbell's Farewell to Red Gap into Carmichael Gal, that scoop, that very fiddly scoop into Carmichael Gal. I really love that, and it's exciting. It sounds really cool. Of course, Pete's really good at what he does. But it did make me wonder, like, to what degree did you have to work consciously to make your pipes maybe kind of mimic what we might think of as more typical Appalachian instruments? And I'm thinking like fiddle style, banjo style. Like, were you using tricks to kind of meld your tone or style, like feel in with your fellows on this album?
Definitely, yeah. And it took a lot of, I logged a lot of hours of playing these tunes and sort of developing these tunes with Pete, and just playing them over and over again with him. And then we brought Brad in later, who we knew would just catch on in 3 seconds. And of course he did.
Yeah.
But for me to kind of, and we had already started this process, 10 years ago with the Piper and the Holler, Pete playing on that, though he played mostly banjo on that album. But I'd already started this journey, but I felt like I never quite figured out all the little things that I needed to do to really get the pipes to sound with a more authentic American accent or Appalachian accent in that way. And it took some reinventing of grace note patterns, or maybe more rather where I placed the grace notes in the tune, putting them on the offbeat rather than on the downbeats as we would in Scottish music. But the scoops for sure, which you hear in Irish music and every so often in Scottish piping, but it's definitely a Southern feature. And yeah, finding those little tricks, even little melodic patterns that are just more endemic to the Appalachian tradition.
Yeah, actually, tell me. I wonder if this is one of them because I noticed that in Donnie's in the Slop, as well as Money Musk, there's this sort of like seesaw pattern that happens. In one of them, it's like E-A-D-A, and the other one's like E-A-C-A, E-A-C-A. That sounds really fun, and when I try mimicking it on my chanter, it feels really fun. It feels like really physical. And
Yeah.
I thought, man, it feels almost like a bow going back and forth, when a fiddler like lifts their hand and drops it, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
What I think might be happening in tunes like that and those sorts of melodic patterns or even implied harmonies. So you have a kind of A major chord being spelled out between the A, the C sharp, and the E. That's a very easy thing to play on the fiddle, I think, and fairly easy on the pipes too.
For someone who knows how to play the fiddle anyway, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the banjo, if you know how to play the banjo, and your banjo is tuned in to play in that key.
Yeah.
So the other thing, it's the ease of these Southern fiddlers playing for dances, or anyone playing for dances. You learn that you have to play tunes over and over and over again, often at very high speed. And so you're looking for very efficient ways to play the tunes. And often that can change the tune a little bit. Like, actually be so much easier if I play this note instead of that other jumpy one over there. And it just it'll streamline things better that way. So fiddlers are doing a lot of that, especially the really fast hoedowns. They're looking for ways to streamline things, and the tunes kind of evolve that way, I suspect. The other thing that's probably happening is just a musical thing where you have notes that ring and harmonize really well in the fiddle with the open strings, the A and the E, and put a C sharp in the middle, and it's just a very nice major chord. And since so much of music is about tension and release, you have to have some tension, so you kind of find a different chord that might create a little tension, or a different tuning possibly somewhere in there, or like a G major chord. We do this a lot on pipes. We play A major notes, A, C sharp, and E, and then we go to G major notes, G, B, and D. And we go back and forth, and that creates this tension and release with the drone.
Yeah.
And it works with the fiddle too, with their open strings ringing or droning strings as well. So I have a feeling both of those are at play for tunes like that.
You mentioned Donnie's in the Slop being possibly Cape Breton-y. Man, I have been ignorant of so many piping traditions. Only recently did I finally figure out that I had often been confusing Cape Breton with Brittany in terms of their piping traditions.
Aha.
A fiddler friend of mine, we were talking about Cape Breton fiddling, and I kept bringing up things that I thought were pertinent, and she was like, "No, that's the other side of the ocean." I was like, "Oh man, now I see what I've been getting wrong."
The name is the word Breton is very confusing.
Yeah,
and you are not alone in having had that confusion at all.
Well, and I'm still not sure I could always sort stuff out by ear, but it has been fun. Jeremy Kingsbury over at the Wetootwaag Bagpipes and History podcast to finish out the most recent season. He had like this mixtape where he just would play music from other artists and then talk about it. And he had so two things. He interviewed a Cape Breton piper. Now I'm nervous, so I can't remember his name. But it was really interesting, really fun to listen to.
Barry Shears, was it?
Barry Shears, it was.
Yep.
That was him. Really great interview. I listened to that one a few times just because it's so fun to hear him talking about a tradition that was like, what? It's like, he talked about like piping interacting with like First Nations people having learned to fiddle, and just like this I mean, this is what I mean. It's so much of what's exciting about this album as well, right? The transatlantic movement of music and you know, different genres working together and stuff like that. It's the new synthesis that comes out of them and stuff, you know.
Exactly, and there's no stopping that sort of that, you know, the musicians hearing something from another tradition and saying, "Oh man, I want to try that," and it's just inevitable that you get these combinations and these
Yeah.
fusions that, in some cases, will become their own tradition, and certainly is the case with Cape Breton, but Appalachian music for sure, with the influence mostly of the traditions from the enslaved Africans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and actually, maybe we should hop over to that real quick. Is it only a problem on my side of the Mississippi that people say Appalachia? Um,
No, not at all. Both pronunciations are fine. In that, the people who are from that region more often pronounce it Appalachia, like I'm going to throw an apple at you.
yeah.
But I think even though I was born in Tennessee, we left when I was fairly young, and we were up north for a little while and then down to Central Florida. And I think for much of my youth, I wound up saying Appalachian, and it wasn't until I kind of began to pay more attention to the tradition that I heard more and more people in the tradition using that pronunciation, and it sounded kind of remotely familiar to me, and I've readopted that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember PBS did a documentary about the people of Appalachia years ago, and I remember hearing a lady talk about that pronunciation, and she said, "Go ahead and say it however you want."
Yeah.
But she related it to if you were in Ireland, if you were to call the city Derry or Londonderry, she said, in one word, you're going to tell whoever you're talking to if they can trust you. And so she said,
Oh.
if you want people who live there to trust you, you're going to say Appalachia.
Huh.
And if you say Appalachia, they know a lot about you in just
Yep.
one word.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Well, and also, by the way, I really appreciate sort of like word crafting and the explanation that you give, and I'll link to it in the show notes for anybody who wants to read when you're describing the album and how it came apart, came together. You mentioned it was an appalachification of many tunes.
Absolutely.
And you used the word transmogrification, which I know exists in dictionaries, but I don't know of anybody who uses that word who hasn't read Calvin and Hobbes, and so I've got to assume that you've enjoyed some Calvin and Hobbes.
You're completely accurate with that, and I did Google to see if that was really a legitimate word, and
Yeah.
when I discovered that it was, I thought, well, how can we not use this?
Yeah.
But Appalachification might be something newer in the
Yeah.
lexicon.
Well, I like it, and we've now got a bunch of subjects to apply it to, all these excellent tracks. Oh yeah, but that was the thing that Jeremy had mentioned in one of his episodes. He played a track of a Scottish fiddler playing Strathspey on the fiddle,
Hmm.
and that's the first time I've ever heard a Strathspey on anything that wasn't bagpipes.
Hmm.
And it was almost an existential crisis for me because I've been playing Strathspeys on my bagpipes for like 15 years, and in one moment I went, we shouldn't even be trying. Like, this is a form meant for the fiddle. It obviously developed on the fiddle. Why are we even trying to do this with the bagpipes? But I think good pipers can do it well, and that's part of what I loved about this album. I think you clearly pushed your small piping style further into the realm of like sharing things with the instruments you were bouncing the sound off of. Like, it's not like it's a bagpipe album with accompaniment. You know,
Right.
it's a
Yeah.
banjo album, and it's a fiddle album, and it's a pipe album, and they all work together in very equal ways, which I loved Piper in the Holler, still do. Some of my favorite tracks are on there. In fact, I've got the LP cover hanging on my wall as wall art because I like the cover
Wow.
so much.
Oh my gosh.
Don't want to make you feel uncomfortable or anything, but I like it that much. So it's nothing against that album when I say that, like, it feels like that album was already magic, but this album, The Bird's Flight, pushes that magic even further. Like, it refines what the Piper in the Holler was going for even more, and kind of like finds the spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I'm glad. It's very encouraging to hear you say that, because that was kind of our goal, was to try to make this really, really click, really work. And we haven't had the benefit of, hundreds of years of these three instruments all playing together and sort of evolving together, and the music evolving to match that, and paired with the dance tradition as well. All of that mixed together, and in some ways the language. It's very hard to separate those three in an established tradition. So to be bringing the pipes and just sort of plugging them in suddenly, and to do that gracefully or tastefully is took some work, and I'm sure there's plenty of room for improvement still. But one thing you could say, well, there's the disadvantage of the pipes not, evolving with Appalachian fiddling styles, so that they weren't together, or with the banjo for a couple hundred years. Mm-hmm. That said, I think in some ways the fiddle kept some bagpipiness about it in Appalachia, since so much of that tradition is from the British Isles. That droniness, some of the modality of pipe tunes has always been there, always been present. So the pipes in a way have been there, just not physically as an instrument.
Do you feel like with the banjo though too, and maybe it's just lucky happenstance, but I've always been really drawn to that claw hammer style, mm-hmm. and it certainly seems like we hear plenty of that on the album. Brad seems to be real good at whatever he's doing. It sure sounds nice. If I knew more banjo, I might be able to say what it is. I don't know what it is, but it sounds real nice.
Yeah, he's superb. Yeah.
But it feels like there's some of that drony quality going on there as well, and maybe that's part of what makes the blend of the three work so well, is that everybody can kind of drone. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And on the banjo, it's a well, in the fiddle too. And I think this is partly why I muted the bass drone of my pipes. I didn't ever use a bass drone.
Tell me about that. That is interesting.
The drones.
Why do you think that works so well?
I think it just to sort of maybe better match that high lonesome sound, as they call it. The fiddle does not have any low drones. The banjo does not have any low drones.
Right.
The fiddle doesn't even.
Drone, and it's the highest string on there, huh?
Yes, exactly. If you think of the lap dulcimer, there are no low drones in that. So a lot of the instruments that are endemic to the tradition don't have low notes, even, much less a low drone. So it just felt out of place to have a bass drone going for this album. And in fact, whenever I play Southern style music now, I tend to not include the bass drone. And also that can get a little muddy. That can conflict with the lower notes of the banjo sometimes. So it just kind of gives some room for those low notes of the banjo to be heard a bit better.
Yeah. Speaking of letting things be heard a bit better, do you feel like part of the piper's skill in playing music like this is knowing when not to play? Because it seemed to me like the track where Pete is singing, Moonshiner, seems like a really strong example where the pipes are there, but they're contributing to the overall whole. Like, they're not getting in the way of Pete singing. You know what I mean? And that would be a shame, of course. It's fun to listen to Pete sing.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a live setting, that gets a little more complicated, because in the studio, you can control the balance of volume of everything and isolate everything and have a whole lot of control that way. Live is a little tougher. Thankfully, Pete has a very strong voice, so he can compete with a small pipe chanter. Myself, if I'm singing just on my own, I do not have a strong voice, or haven't trained it enough to be stronger. So, now where was I going with that question?
Pete singing, pipes not playing to get in the way.
Right. So
not to play, I guess, being a reductionist, maybe.
Yeah, or finding ways to not draw attention to the pipe part, even if it is sounding. There's the volume aspect, but also not doing too much in terms of changing notes or embellishments that might catch the attention of your ear. So trying to keep the background supportive and supportive, but not distracting. Yeah. Kind of like a movie soundtrack in that way.
I've been a moonshiner I've spent all my money on whiskey and beer. I'll go to some holler, I'll set up a stew, and I'll sell you a gallon for $2 bill.
Enhancing the emotion of the song, but not actually being heard necessarily,
Right.
consciously.
Gotcha. Well, so we've talked a bit about how things come together, maybe chronologically when they came together. You mentioned that track 3 on the album is maybe the catalyst tune that brought stuff together. That's Hell of a Fish.
That's it, yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, at the risk of giving away I love kind of trying to keep some level of mystery for the origin tunes for these tracks. The tune from which this one was sourced is a jig and four-parted jig that rhymes fairly closely with Hell of a Fish. Most people will probably have figured this out already, but the fourth part in the original jig, the Scottish jig, has a pretty cool syncopated part that's unusual in Scottish music, but it's a trad tune. It's very popular in sessions. And I think as I was playing it one day, years ago, I just thought, golly, that has that offbeat kick that's so prominent in old-time music, even though it's a jig and you don't have many jigs in old-time music. So what if I turn this into a 2/2, into a hoedown rhythm and retain that offbeat kick and that part and really kind of tried to feature that. And I made several attempts at doing that, and I began to share them with Pete, who was not all that impressed. And in fact, the little spark that this tune started kind of fizzled for a year, possibly 2 years. Well, it just wasn't that successful, what I had tried to do. But for some reason, we both felt inclined to try it one more time a year or two later. And this time it caught fire. And oddly enough, we didn't really make heavy use of that offbeat feature that's in the jig. That kind of got smoothed over a little bit in this final version.
It's interesting that it would be a thing that gets you thinking in the right direction, but then it wouldn't feature in the
Right, yeah.
Of course, I've never talked to Pete myself. I've only ever listened to his music, but I enjoyed reading his rebuttal to your story of the origin of the album, and it made me think, like, this must be one of those guys who he's a lovely person, of course, but just doesn't have any reason to sugarcoat anything. If he doesn't like it, I'd imagine he'd just say, that's not good.
Exactly. Well, he can be very diplomatic at times, and so much so that you actually aren't entirely sure of what he's getting to.
Oh, yeah.
But he has a great sense of humor, and obviously he's a good writer.
Yeah.
And quite a wit about him. And and never wants to take himself too seriously, or any of us. And it's very, very refreshing and very much needed in our world.
I'd like to talk to Pete someday, if for no other reason than because I was listening to some of his albums, and this takes us off on a tangent. I don't know if you'd even know if you'd have heard it. He has a track on which one of his albums? I can't remember now, but it's called Pioneer Children.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised when I saw it because there's a really popular like Mormon children's song here in Utah that like any Mormon kid growing up will have sung this song. And I was like, well, no way is that, because as far as I know, this is where that tune originates. You know, it's about the Mormon pioneer kids walking across the plains into Utah. It is that song. It's that song. Pete turns it into art too, because like, I mean, it's kind of like Twinkle Twinkle for me, where like, you know, kids singing it and you sing it so many times, and it's like, and even the melody of it's like, pioneer children sang as they walked and walked and walked and walked. And the old joke is that you just keep going forever and walked and walked. It's not super musically interesting. Pete makes it beautiful. And not only did he play, I think he sang too. And I was like, well, now wait a minute. How did this song get over there? What's Pete doing with this tune?
He paired that with something else. I'm remembering that track. There's another, and I don't remember the origin of that track, but it is probably not of British Isles origin. But he has had a lot of influences in his musical upbringing and explorations, a vast array. And there's no telling where he's going to draw inspiration from, but such a great musician and such a great person, and I bet he would love to chat with you. So, and he would have some very, I bet, fascinating things to talk about with you, in terms of spending a lot of time with a piper.
Yeah, it'd be good to get the other side story.
Exactly.
Right? Let us know what are we like.
Exactly.
Because so often I feel like as pipers are like, why won't more people play with me? Maybe you could give us some insight.
You may not want all the answers to that question.
Well, I'll tell you, Tim, initially going into that tangent, I was like, I'll probably cut this out of the episode later. But so much of my listenership, is my local friends. And so they might actually find that little anecdote interesting. I'll put a link to that as well down in the show notes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's probably, I think I found that on Spotify, that exact track, not that long ago. So,
well, let me drag us back in with something else that might be, maybe this is too much, but you got track 6 on this album is Macaulay's.
Macaulay's, yep.
Macaulay's. See, this is my. Do you read much Tolkien, Tim?
I have read Lord of the Rings and loved it.
Yeah,
but
I
not,
love it too, man.
And The Hobbit, but.
Right now,
Oh,
well,
fun.
I'll take you just a little tiny bit deeper for a sec to tell you why this track is special to me. In the Silmarillion, one of the minor gods is named Aule, like with an E with the 2 dots over it. That's why I said Macaulay's. I can't help it. Of course, it's spelled differently, but Macaulay's is what I should be saying, right? Macaulay's. How did you pronounce it?
Macaulay's. So Aule would be this. Macaulay would be son of Aule, so that totally fits.
Yeah, well, and Aule is one of my favorite of these minor gods in the Tolkien mythos. He was a maker of things, like just loved making things. He helped make the sun and the moon and even the earth, and he had no interest in possessing anything. He didn't want to own any of the stuff he made, and he was actually the one who created the dwarves. And he made them just because he wanted to have pupils with whom he could share his creations and his crafting knowledge. And the like superior god, the like father god, if you will, Iluvatar, basically was like, okay, tell you what, I'll give the dwarves independent life because I love that you are being a sub-creator, And so Aule was like, well, thank you so much. And so, but so often dwarves are Scottish, when they're presented, And so it feels like, man, the name Aule is probably more like an anglicized Scotch Gaelic name, which probably comes from Norse tradition or something else, even further back. But it feels like it feels like my worlds are colliding and mixing together in such a beautiful way, and I can't help like painting mythical images behind this track of Aule creating the sun and the earth. And
Wow.
it's a bit silly and a bit like kind of
No.
reaching out farther. But that, that's there you go. That's again the artist putting something out, right, and just
Right.
seeing how it interacts with the listenership.
That's the whole point of art. I should not tell you what this track should mean to you at all. You have to. That's your.
Well, I took over and told you what it meant to me. So
I think it's great.
Now you tell me what's the real story here.
I actually don't want to at this point. Almost that's such a beautiful description, a beautiful scene picture that you painted. Well, we took a few different approaches to naming our tunes on this album. In some cases, we did not change the title of the source tunes. In other cases, we did a little tweak to the title, or we did a rhyming thing, or changed one name or one word or something like that. All of this is something that happened naturally in the Appalachian tradition in the past 200 or 300 years. That's all something that's been documented, so it's not out of step. Nor is what we did for this track naming it after the person from whom I learned the melody from originally, the source melody. And that was Scott Macaulay, who was the director of the College of Piping and Celtic Performing Arts in PEI, Canada, where I spent a year, almost 20 years ago now, as an artist in residence. So I was both collaborating and doing some teaching there, but also studying with Scott. And the melody that we crafted this waltz from, originally I learned from him, though he did not compose it.
Gotcha. I want to ask you more about that Cape Breton tradition and how much it might does it have a big fingerprint on this album? Because I'm thinking of track 9 on there. That's Mackenzie Creek.
Mm-hmm.
I think you mentioned that one probably started life as a fiddle tune, and then moved into Cape Breton, and then moved out of Cape Breton and got changed around. Tell me a little bit about that one.
Sure. Mackenzie Creek, I learned that, again, I'm withholding giving you the tune titles of the origin tune, but this was originally a Strathspey. So funny that you mentioned Strathspeys on the fiddle. I do believe this tune was originally a fiddle tune because its original melodic span was far greater than what the Scottish bagpipe chanter can achieve. And I learned this from a friend in Cape Breton who plays both fiddle and pipes. And I don't know that he was the one to compress, to kind of fold the tune in on itself and get it to fit within an octave. Somebody did over there. And I've always loved the tune. Still a Strathspey in that form, and very pipeable. Though if you were to hear the fiddle version, you might go, "Oh, what a cool note! I wish I could play that." And
Speaking of cool notes that I wish I can play, go say anything you have to say about this tune, and I'll ask you some hardware questions afterward.
Sure. So just to finish on that one. So I've known this as a Cape Breton Strathspey as a pipe tune for myself, and not many other people that I know have outside of Cape Breton have known this tune. But I've taught it to a number of folks at workshops and private lessons and whatnot. But it just seemed like that was one that I started to mess with a little bit and shared it with Pete early in that process of appalachification, and he seemed to really take a liking to it. And it was one of those moments where when we brought Brad into the picture and just had the two of them jam on the tune for a little bit, you realized how sweet that on its own was, and that it didn't really need the pipes anymore. The version that's on this album is pipeable. It does still fit within the octave. But it's nice to have a break from the pipes every so often. They're a pretty intense instrument, and so we didn't want every track to have bagpipes on them all of the time, or every track to even have any bagpipes on them necessarily. So this was a great option for just fiddle and banjo, playing a tune that was originally Cape Breton, maybe Scottish, fiddle brought into piping, Scottish style piping, then appalachified and given back to fiddle and banjo. And it's one of my favorite tracks in the album. Maybe because I'm not sitting there judging the piper. I can just let go and enjoy the ride.
Now I'm gonna just yank us right back and ask you about hardware. I'm pretty sure I'm hearing small pipes and border pipes. What all am I hearing you play on these tracks in this album?
Yep, you are hearing small pipes and you are hearing border pipes, and the border pipes are fairly typical in terms of what key. They're a standard A chanter, and drones. I did mess with some. There are some less conventional drones, and of course I never used the bass drone for anything in this album on either bagpipe. The small pipes, I think I used 3 different small pipe chanters. The standard one in A, which was used for the Farewell Dundee and Babe of Bethlehem track, and then a C chanter, and then one even higher, the D chanter, just to kind of shake things up a little bit in terms of, so that every tune was not in A. Like a whole album in A would get pretty monotonous.
Yeah. I'm perfectly ready for it to be the case that it's just my own ignorance that has led to me feeling this way, but it seems like the last few years there has been a surge in interest and availability of C tunes set in C and the chanter and drone set up to play in C on small pipes. I feel like until just a few years ago, A and D were the options, and all of a sudden C is like the hot new thing on the scene. Is that just my ignorance, or is that a real thing that's happening?
C is the new A, is basically.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm not very plugged into the Scottish scene right now, but I have been hearing rumors that the C chanter is becoming more and more all the rage in Scottish small pipe playing. And it makes perfect sense to me in terms of how comfortable it is to hold a C chanter. The spacing of the finger holes is really, really, for my hands at least, and I think for a lot of people, I have pretty average-sized paws. It's
A
a
is
very
spread out and D is so tight. I can imagine.
and
that would
C is a really sweet spot there, and also for singing. For people who want to sing with pipes, whether it's the piper, him or herself, or someone else, it's a more typically accessible range for singing, and it's just a very sweet sound. And also, maybe since we've just been hearing pipes play in A small pipes play in A for so long, to hear this slightly higher pitch, like we might perceive it as being brighter somehow. It's refreshing.
Could be the same kind of phenomena that keeps driving competitive pipe band tuning higher and higher and higher and higher.
It could, yes, I bet it's linked to that too. The downside is that it's a little less fun for string players.
Oh yeah.
Because once you play in what we think of as D major, a tune in the key of D that sounds in the key of F on a C chanter, which isn't terrible for string players, but they tend to prefer keys that have sharps and not flats, and the key of F
sure.
has a flat. And I have to sneeze.
Oh, go ahead. I'll cut it out later. No problem.
You can keep it in if you want something entertaining and gross.
It's below 17 over there. So you gotta be
Yeah. Yeah, I'm getting over what might have been a cold or might have been Omicron. I don't actually know.
Yeah.
We tested multiple times and it was always negative, but very suspicious timing and very suspicious symptoms. So.
Yeah. Oh, our household is in the same situation. Everybody's
Yeah.
getting over it.
Yep. So I'm still have the clogged plumbing here. I apologize. You're
No,
getting a
it's all
very intimate listen on that plumbing.
No problem. It's coming through nice and clean. Now,
Okay.
maybe do you? I wish I knew off the top of my head. Where's a tune in that you use the sea chanter?
I think Macaulay's is one.
Okay.
The very first track, Campbell's Farewell, I think is another. Let me just double check. We do, and you won't have access to this if you did a Bandcamp download, but if you have the physical album or look on the album's website, we do list what instruments are played.
Oh, I
apologize.
see. No problem. Yeah, I
And
think
also-
the digital track list will list like who is playing, but yeah, not as much information about which instruments are playing.
No, the metadata won't have the really detailed stuff, but the website does, and the album liner notes does, and
Oh yes, I see.
so you'll.
I'm actually looking at the website as we've been talking, so I see that.
The other fun thing about this, looking that you can start to see that not only am I changing what instrument or what key I'm playing, then the banjo and the fiddle are also changing their tuning patterns on with their
Yeah.
strings, which is quite a feat. Pete hardly used the same, and maybe for that matter, Brad as well. They hardly use the same tuning for two different tracks. Constantly shifting their tuning patterns, and each one has its own personality, but also requires its own mental gymnastics for like what I've always thought of as an A with this position of my ring finger or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
This is now a different note,
Yeah.
and that takes a lot of mental work to and a lot of muscle memory for that to fall into place.
Yes, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's precisely why so many of your arrangements you provide, even if the like the organ part, for example, is in D, you provide the A fingering for the piper, just because it's easier for no matter what instrument our hands are touching, it might be easier to just keep thinking the same way.
That's right. Yeah, and some people may enjoy the challenge of reading in the actual sounding key that you're playing in, but in the orchestral and concert band worlds, there are plenty of transposing instruments, and it's for that same reason, so that you can swap instruments and sound in a different key or in a different register, but you don't have to reassign different notes to the same fingering patterns, or vice versa.
Well, Tim, if it's okay with you, I see a track that I want to pull in right now, just since we've been talking about the sea chanter, Kilmarnock. That's one of my favorite melodies that I've ever encountered anywhere. It comes up in your hymn collection, and here, I'm suddenly having like a my brain is suddenly melting a little bit. This is, correct me if I'm wrong, because now I'm like, wait, was that on Piper in the Holler? This is where we've got the words to Amazing Grace, right?
Correct.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
like I've heard Amazing Grace with New Britain all my life, and so maybe it's just that it's different that's exciting.
Yep.
And that may be a big part of it, but this is just, I mean, and also it's Pete singing, and Pete's got a great voice.
Yep.
But then also the small pipes are in C, and so even though I hadn't realized that before, maybe that's part of what's making this, really, really tickle the inside of my ears. But I love this track so much.
Well, thanks, and almost all credit goes to Pete for this one. I did introduce the original Scottish hymn tune to him, and he very quickly just created his own version of it. This particular melody is really pretty much 100% Pete Sutherland in terms of the appalachification of it, to use that word again. And that happened very organically, very quickly. He was just messing around with the fiddle, and it just arrived very quickly, and we knew this was a gem almost instantaneously. And but the trick for us then was finding words, finding poetry that we thought was a good fit.
Yeah.
We didn't like the poetry that's often paired with the Kilmarnock hymn tune in the church, your standard church hymnal, as much. We were looking at secular options, and Pete was looking at, had a collection of poetry of, I think, some Appalachian lyrics and whatnot that he was trying various ones out, and none of them clicked. But we went back to that first day when he was messing around with this tune, and just utterly spontaneously, just to try singing it, he just thought, oh, well, Amazing Grace will fit this. Let's just try those.
Just as a placeholder, huh?
Exactly, just to sing it for now.
Yeah.
But we never found anything we liked better than that. And it can be really fun to take a really, really well-known lyric or melody and swap it out with something, a different pairing. And church hymnals and shape note hymnals have indices for this in the back for this very purpose, where they have the metrics, an index of just the metrics, the meter of the poetry or of the melody, and you can find a different melody for, you can put Away in a Manger to a totally different melody, and it can be really refreshing to do that and it brings the poetry to life, or brings a stale melody to life if you put new poetry to it.
Right, yeah. It makes you think about either one of them in different ways. And I wonder, again, far be it for me to pass judgment, but I wonder if, I'm sure this would still have been pleasant no matter what the lyrics were, but I wonder if it would have quite been the same kind of magic that it is if it had lyrics that were unfamiliar to the listener. Maybe with so many other things about it being unfamiliar, maybe having that one connection that, like, I've heard these words so many times, but this is different. Maybe that's part of what makes them lean in,
Yep. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, and it is, and it's fun to sing it too. And we all three of us at some point are singing on that, kind of like the session idea where we join in bit by bit because we're sort of just drawn into participating.
That makes me want to ask you about a little bit more about the process of how these. Is it the same process for every track, or is it totally unique? Because listening to track 8, for example, that goes Farewell to Dundee into Babe of Bethlehem, makes it, to me, listening to it, it sounded like Brad was like, hey guys, here's a tune I like, and he started playing it, and then Pete was like, yeah, that sounds kind of nice, and then kind of joined in, and then you sitting there kind of fingering along quietly finally felt like, oh, okay, now I think I can come in here, and then came in. It felt like an organic jam session that built in a way. And I'm sure that that's not the case for all the tunes, but was that the case for this set or for some?
Well, you have such good visions about these tunes, and I'm afraid the truth is maybe a lot less exciting. But
let me pull some more books off the shelf and read you like some Tolkien poetry and be like,
oh,
hey,
please,
surely this inspired, right?
Oh my gosh,
I don't mean to set you up like that, Tim. Sorry.
No, it's so much more fun. Well, we can hold both options.
Yeah.
And I can just say that my memory of which could be now skewed and false. So maybe what you're imagining is the truth.
We'll have Pete write a rebuttal.
And Pete will write his rebuttal, and we'll never know what happened. When I was actually working on the collection of Christmas carols, the On This Day, Earth Shall Ring collection, let
me just plug that real quick. It's great. I'll put a link to that in the description as well. Very, very excellent collection.
Well, thank you. And we have chatted about that
We
on your
have, yes,
podcast
sir, yeah.
a while back. So one of the carols featured in there is this carol called "Babe of Bethlehem," and or it's a shape note hymn, but certainly works as a carol. And somehow in the years that I was very slowly piecing that collection together, I stumbled across a Scottish lute tune called "Adieu Dundee." Adieu spelled Adew, which is not the correct French spelling for adieu, but good enough. You get the idea. And that was published sometime in the early 1600s, either by or for Sir John Skene of Halyard's Castle. And that was later transcribed and anyway, it had been passed around. But that lute tune is, when I stumbled across that, I thought, oh my gosh, that is absolutely the predecessor to Babe of Bethlehem. Somehow that went from the 17th century Scottish lute tune over to this American shape note hymn. They're uncannily similar.
Yeah.
So much so that we had a lot of problems rehearsing and even recording these two back to back because they're so similar. We would get confused as to what tune we were actually playing. So this track is, to me, we didn't do much tweaking at all to either melody. We just took what already existed and just showed what kind of happened naturally already here in the U.S. between a Scottish tune coming over and becoming Appalachified in its own way, in its own timing, well before we were ever alive, any of us.
See, I had assumed that it was two very distinct and yet similar enough tunes that were just flowing one into the other. But so it's almost like you took me on a chronological journey musically.
Perhaps that's my theory.
Yeah.
We may never know.
Yeah.
It's conceivable that William Walker, in his Southern Harmony hymnal of shape note hymns, just invented a melody that happened to be really similar to this one. But they're pretty. It's a pretty unique melody, and I feel pretty convinced that one grew out of the other.
Now dragging you back over to your hardware, could you tell me a little bit about border pipes and why they're not small pipes?
Sure. The biggest difference that you're experiencing as a listener and as a player too is that the bore, the internal bore of the chanter is conical. So it's cone shaped. It gets wider as the chanter goes down. It's the same with the highland pipes. Also, the reed is a little smaller and thinner bladed. The blades are actually a little thinner. And that combination, and maybe I should add in slightly larger sound holes too. The finger holes are a little bit larger than for small pipes. That combination creates a chanter that sounds an octave higher than your standard small pipe chanter, and with a tone that's a little bit more. I describe it as it having an impish sneer.
An
Of
impish
sorts.
sneer, I like that. Yeah, I can hear that.
It's also sweeter in a way, sweeter than the highland pipes,
Yeah.
maybe just because it's a little quieter. The other really interesting thing about conical chanters, including the highland pipes, is that you can do cross fingerings on them and get more notes than you can normally get on a small pipe.
Yeah, that's
So-
Jeremy again over at Wetootwaag's Bagpipe and History podcast. He's been experimenting with his highland pipes as well as some border pipes to not only do cross fingering for accidentals, but to push the range up. Which
Yes.
I didn't even know was all. I had an idea that you could get up to a B, but he's been getting up to a C and even a D sometimes.
Wow.
And I understand that this actually has plenty of historical precedent. It's almost like we've forgotten how to do it.
Yeah, I think a lot of the border tunes often feature a high B or higher, and it's something that's happened in the woodwind family of instruments and has been happening for a long time, and we're among the only ones not generally doing it. Is that overblowing?
Yeah.
The hard thing with pipes is that the reed is not in contact with our mouth. We cannot manipulate the reed with our mouth, with our embouchure, which a clarinetist can do, an oboist, saxophonist, all of those guys and gals, and everyone can manipulate the reed with their mouth as they overblow.
Yeah.
And they can have more control over the tuning and the tone that way.
Well,
We
in
can't-
those cases, they're not throwing their drones off by doing so either.
Exactly. And uilleann pipes also do some of this, and a lot of it is bag pressure related, but I gather it's not quite that simple of just squeezing harder. But that is definitely a part of it. And they have a nearly 2-octave range. But again, the tuning can start to suffer as they go up higher, and the tone perhaps as well.
Yeah. So this border pipes themselves as an instrument and the tradition of music are both things that are fairly new to me that I've really been enjoying. I dropped a heavy hint to my wife, and luckily for Christmas got a collection that Matt Seattle put together called the Master Piper.
Oh, it's a great one. Yes,
Yeah,
I love that.
it's been a lot of fun to start looking through, and it's like this whole nother little tradition that was just tucked in the middle of traditions that I thought I was familiar to, and I had no idea this one was there all along. So I find this stuff exciting. Who makes your pipes? I know I asked you a bit about this when we were talking about the Christmas collection, but the ones that you were using on this collection, if as long as you're okay calling out the
Sure.
makers.
Oh, yeah, happily. I hope they're okay with me doing it and
Sure.
not like, oh my God,
I doubt they'd be embarrassed. Like, oh, I don't want to be associated with this.
who knows? I'm not going to assume anything. So I have a kind of hybrid instruments at the moment.
Yeah.
The first bellows pipes I ever owned were a set of border pipes made by the Garvey pipes. Nigel over in Edinburgh, who died not that long ago, maybe a year ago or so. Excellent set of border pipes, but it is hard to get repairs done or tweaks done or reeds modified when you're on the other side of an ocean.
Yeah.
So that reality, paired with getting to know pipe makers here on this side of the Atlantic, some very talented pipe makers, has led to that set of border pipes gradually becoming...
like piece by piece.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
the chanter, Will Woodson and Nate Banton made the chanter I've been using for the past 4 or 5 years now.
Every time I hear a set of their pipes pop up on YouTube or something, it sounds amazing.
I love their work, and I love them as people too. They're really great fellas.
I honestly had a dream last night that I was playing one of their, what they call their complex sets
Uh-huh.
with those super low D drones.
Yes, the testosterone, as I like to call it.
That's a great name for it.
I don't think they like that term, but I'm sticking with it.
I wonder, I don't know if I was having like cardiac arrhythmia or something at the time, but I swear in my dream I could feel it rumbling in my chest. And that was a good dream. It was a very
I
good
love
dream.
it. Oh, I love it. The contrabass drone is really a treat to hear. I do not own one myself, but I love hearing them, and I have some students who have them.
Yeah.
So border pipes are now the chanter made by Will and Nate, and drones that are still the Garvey drones, but Nate is working on a new set of border drones for me. And he sent one little drone all by itself to
really?
me while this recording was being made, because I really wanted a high E border drone for some of these tracks.
Kind of the opposite end of the contrabass, huh? You're going all the way up there.
That high lonesome,
Yeah.
high dronesome sound.
High
And
dronesome, very nice. I like that.
sorry, yeah.
Coin that.
So that's still in the works, but that's where I'm heading is a set of a full set of Banton Woodson border pipes. The small pipes are entirely Nate Banton, with the exception of the D chanter is one that Hamish Moore made in the 90s, and I bought that used. So that I used that one on Moonshiner, I think, and at least one other one. Oh, the title track, The Bird's Flight. So that's a lovely little D Blackwood chanter. No custom anything on that one. The other chanters all have now custom high B keys, or the equivalent of a high B.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you about, were those sneaky notes that you pop in there that I go, wait a minute. I can't do that. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, having played clarinet for a number of years as a teenager and in college, having that one little extra note there, and hearing the fiddlers do that in so many different genres, Irish, Appalachian, and sometimes Scottish, it's a very seductive note, and often not necessary, but it can be very pleasing to just kind of have that one little extra peak there.
Well, it feels so much like it's like the low G, like I might not use it all that often for the melody, but darn it if it's not useful for embellishments.
Yeah, exactly. And when you do use it, it's a very special moment too.
Yeah.
So I'm not going back probably to not having that key. I'm making good use of those. I think I'm making good use. I'm trying to and enjoying it anyway. The other custom feature is a thumb hole for my lower thumb, my right thumb, that's kind of behind the B and the C. Yeah. So with that, if you finger a standard B but lift your lower thumb off at the same time, you get a C natural, or the equivalent depending on what key you're in. So the A small pipe chanter, and the C small pipe chanter, both made by Nate, have that high key, the high B key, and the low C natural thumb hole.
Yeah.
Which I enjoy, all of having that extra freedom or to explore other modalities or wider melodies. That I don't think I'm going back.
Yeah, I haven't been headstrong or reckless enough to do it myself yet, but I have asked a couple of nearby one pipe maker and also just people who I know who own drill presses about just drilling me a hole. Like if I can just find about where that C natural should be, just drill me a nice big one and I'll tape it till it fits.
Yeah. I wonder if Nate has already posted somewhere on Instagram or Facebook, maybe just his, the dimensions or the measurements for where he puts that. And I don't think he's the only one. I think Rob Felsberg in Pittsburgh is also adding that to some of his chanters, possibly by request or maybe not. The nice thing is if you don't like it, and if you're not using it, you can just put a piece of tape over the entire hole and not ever have to think about it.
Yeah, just tape right over it.
And it doesn't affect the tuning or tone of other notes having that hole there. So
Hello, friends. I'll be quick so you can get back to this awesome episode. I hope that you're enjoying listening to it half as much as I enjoyed doing the interview. Tim's an awesome guy, and he's made some awesome music. If you haven't already hopped over to his website or Bandcamp or somewhere where you can buy a copy of this album, I'm sure you're going to need to do that by the end of the interview because it is such an excellent collection of music, and we don't get through all the tracks here. And so I couldn't recommend it enough. There will be links in the show notes below if you want, but Googling around, you'll probably find it. And if you want to support the show, of course, we've got a Patreon account, so you can go to patreon.com/DroningOnPodcast, and we do regular drawings for patrons. This month, the drawing is going to be the prize for the winner that comes out of that metaphorical hat. Will get a copy of this album, The Bird's Flight. So physical copy of the album, I'll send it to you. I'll probably tuck some cool stickers or something into it as well for you. So if you want a chance at winning that, just hop over to Patreon if you're not already there and pledge some money. It doesn't have to be a lot. It can be a little. Oh, I mean, it can be a lot if you want it to be a lot. I won't say that that's a bad thing. But even if you only subscribe for 1 month and then cancel it just to see if you don't find yourself the lucky winner of the album, I would not be offended. It's a great collection of tracks. And if you feel so inclined, I do invite you to follow the show on Facebook. It's a fun way to interact with each other, talk about past episodes. I like to get on there and ask for advice for upcoming episodes, questions you might like to ask interviewees, that kind of stuff. So that's just on Facebook. You can just search for Droning On Podcast. It's also on Instagram, the show is. If that's more your thing, that's just droning.on.podcast. And you can always email the show at TheDroningOnPodcast@gmail.com. Links to all this stuff are in the show notes. So that's it. Get on back to this interview. And thanks again for listening. Bye-bye. So speaking of tuning and tone, what was it that you did to which set of pipes for Briar Rock and Geese in the Clover and Come Along Billy?
Aha. Yeah, so those that track is in the key of G, which is not a particularly native key for us when we're playing on an A chanter.
Yeah.
Which I was doing.
Speaking of not using the low G in the melody, right? Like, well, go ahead and prove me wrong, Tim.
Well, this is right, and this is a very it's still kind of a foreign experience to me to play in that key.
Yeah.
Because for decades I've never played in the key of G on a bagpipe.
Yeah.
So suddenly, where you're used to the low A fingering pattern or maybe the D fingering pattern being your home base note.
Right.
That's where you land on. That's where you're centered on. That's your anchor. Suddenly it's your pinky. And everything is shifted. All those melodic patterns, you're so used to certain melodic patterns. All of those are now shifted a note down.
Yeah.
And it takes a little getting used to. The other problem comes down to a pretty heady topic, far more involved than you'll want to get into this discussion, but it gets into the realm of temperament, where we're talking about very fine tuning, but it really can make quite a difference in what you're experiencing musically. On most Scottish pipe chanters, the low G is actually very flat compared to what you would find on a typical Western instrument, like an equal tempered piano or organ. RGs are, even if you tune your A perfectly to that organ, RGs are generally going to be very flat comparatively.
Yeah.
And there's a whole reason for that. It involves how we tune each individual note of our chanter to the harmonics in our drones. And those harmonics are naturally not equal tempered, just the way the physics of sound works. So when you now base yourself in that key of G, you have an issue that you're now basing your a whole tune on a note that's flat.
Yeah.
Compared to other
Everything
instruments.
else will sound off, right?
So that either means that you have to make your whole chanter much sharper to get that G in tune, and then you flatten all the other notes with tape considerably.
Yeah.
Or you have a chanter specially made so that the G is a more standard tuning to Western instruments.
Basically
or you
just
actually
scoot that hole up higher, right?
Exactly. Or in my case, Nate will not be too happy about this, but he knows
Did you carve it out?
I have carved it. I have done some carving a little bit, but I also asked him to kind of compromise a little bit in advance.
You took a Dremel to the holy relic, Tim.
You know, it's scary,
Yeah,
but if you're
I'm
careful,
sure that made you nervous. Yeah.
for me, it made me much more comfortable playing in that key. Or, in my other trio playing with Jeremiah and Alex, Jeremiah has an accordion that has 300 reeds, and he's not going to retune those
No,
for me.
I can't imagine he would. No.
And they're equal tempered. So if I want to be fairly in tune with him on certain notes and then certain keys, I have to be closer to equal tempered. And
Yeah.
I may not get all the way there, but I like to get at least part way there, and it's a more comfortable listening experience than playing too.
Well, it certainly serves the purpose. I mean, the track is lovely. But what about drones? What do you do with drones for that track?
Aha, also good question. I have drones for, I think most pipes are capable of this, most instruments. Bellows versions, small pipes and border pipes. Most drones, you can usually get 2 different notes out of them. You get the standard A or E as the baritone drone, and then you can either go, depending on how it's configured, you can either go up, the A's can go up to B, or they can go down to G. There's usually enough room to play there, or you may have to manipulate the reed a little bit. Likewise,
Tops around, right?
Yes, genetic modification that way for sure, which I've also done and had to do for this album too. So I moved, I think the way my small pipes are configured, the tenor drone can do both an A and a G. So I just moved that A drone down to a G. And the alto drone can do both a D and an E, and I left it at D there. So I had an open fifth, the G-D combination to really lock that tonality in.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I flatter myself by thinking that I'm not the only one who wants to know those kinds of details. So I'd imagine that the last few minutes have been as interesting to listeners as to me. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but I think that that's exactly like, as pipers, we listen, we go, now what's he playing? What's his setup? What's going on there? So.
Yeah. Oh, we have to geek out on gear talk for sure.
Right. Yeah. So I don't mean to take you back into it if there's not more there, but we kind of touched on embellishments, and how these aren't, you're not playing your standard like competition circle embellishments on this album. Do you feel like at this point you've kind of done it enough that you could almost even write down a list of Appalachia embellishments? You know what I mean? Like, there's a special set that are for Pembroke. There's a special set for competition. Maybe there's a special set that's solidifying in your mind and in your playing for this genre.
That's a really good question. At this point, I'm using, for the most part, single grace notes by and large that are endemic to Scottish style piping, but I'm just putting them in different places or using them a little bit differently. And relying a lot on the E grace note and D grace note more than the high G in some cases. Partly I just like the sound of it, and it also kind of, in some ways, mimics the higher drone of a banjo or the droney string of an open string on the fiddle. Certain notes the fiddle's more inclined to have an open D or an open E string available, and same with the banjo than say a G natural or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Although no, they have those too, but they tend not to drone them as much. Certainly
Sure.
not and not in these keys. So it just felt more harmonic to me, or sounded more southern when I played more E grace notes and more D grace notes,
Yeah.
and using them as a kind of a rhythm section effect
Right.
at times.
That offbeat thing you were mentioning, right?
The chuck, the boom
Yeah.
chuck, the chuck of the boom chuck. So if you listen to people playing the banjo in the clawhammer style, or people playing the fiddle in the old time Appalachian style, there's a huge emphasis on the offbeat.
Mm-hmm.
Not for every single measure, but a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's very prominent and it's very pronounced, and I think that probably comes from the influence of the enslaved Africans, their traditions that they brought over, those kind of offbeat rhythms, adopted by musicians. The white settlers that had come, and that influence had a huge influence on the music in Appalachia and in the U.S. generally.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, speaking of that not just the musical form, but on banjos specifically, right?
yeah, I happen to have a banjo here. I don't know how well that will come through on the mic.
Yeah,
but,
bring it through.
Not in great tune.
There it is.
So the standard pattern, the kind of bum titty, that's 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and it's not the loudest thing you're hearing is actually what we would normally think of as the weaker beat. If you learned in a conventional way of playing Strathspeys on the pipes, you learn that the first beat is by far the strongest one, the third beat is the next strongest, and 2 and 4 are quite weak.
Strong weak, medium weak, right?
That's exactly it. We're turning this on its head for old-time music, for Appalachian music, and doing the opposite. So what I've been trying to train myself to do in the past several years, especially for this project, is to not play grace notes on all the downbeats, and sometimes, and very often, not play any grace note on a strong beat, and instead play them on beats 2 and 4. And after 30-odd years of piping, that's a very hard thing to change.
You mentioned the thing. You mentioned that to me once in an email, and I sat down to try to do it, and I still can't do it, Tim. I can't. I hear it, and it sounds awesome, but I can't get my fingers to do it.
It takes some work. It's definitely possible, and it's something I love doing in a workshop setting, getting people to sort of get that groove. And the way I do that is not something I can easily do in this interview, or remotely necessarily, is to get the pipers playing just that offbeat grace note, tapping their foot on the downbeat, as you do in old-time music, but playing grace notes on the offbeat. So it's tap, grace note, tap, grace note, tap, grace note. And then I play a tune while I keep the student or students just playing that offbeat grace note, just droning on a low A, for example, and playing that grace note. And that helps them oh, yeah, that's the feeling.
Yeah.
And it's sort of that offbeat chuck that you hear mandolins doing in bluegrass music, or the banjo, as I just demonstrated. It's so prominent in American music and Appalachian music. So just isolating the grace note all by itself, and something you could do if you're really that bored or really that keen, is put one of these tracks on this album, or really any Scottish reel you could do, and just force yourself to play drone on a low A, if the tune is in A, for example, and play a grace note on the offbeats while you're tapping your foot on the strong beats.
Just like a simple high G grace note, just tap, tap.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And this is where I found the E and the D to be a little more harmonizing with the tune, and so I tend to do a higher percentage of those than I normally would in Scottish music.
They're a little less piercing too, aren't they?
It depends on which bagpipe you're playing. On the border pipe, they're
really?
very quiet. It's a quiet note on the border pipe, but much louder on small pipes.
Now, speaking of the banjo and its history and coming over with enslaved Africans, you've got you've got Brad playing a gourd banjo, which feels like really really calling back to the banjo's origins, on the
Yeah.
McGregor of Roaring Fork. And you mentioned that you were gonna play it until you heard him play it. And so tell me about that, but also Tim, tell me why it is that so many bagpipers, their secondary instrument is either the accordion or the banjo. Like these three seem to go together in such a funny but also really cool way.
It is pretty remarkable and troubling, and uh, it is amazing. But the accordion obviously has the reedy. They're all related in their
Yeah.
own way. The accordion has bellows and it has reeds.
Yep.
The banjo has a drone, although not much else in common with the pipes that way. But what I love about the banjo personally is that I can play at different volumes. I can play them very quietly if I choose to. And it's just a very meditative, especially the clawhammer style is a very meditative pattern. And you can just kind of get lost in a drony, rhythmic droniness of sorts.
Yeah.
And of course it makes sense. Of course, if you're a piper playing the banjo, you're eventually going to say, oh, well, can you play a bagpipe tune on a banjo?
Yeah,
and you just
naturally,
start exploring. And of course, it changes the nature of the tune when you put it on a different instrument, especially one that is really quite different than the pipes.
Yeah.
So that's what I had done with the original tune that became McGregor of Roaring Fork. And really, they're hardly different at all, the original and the current version. And this, I thought, oh, well, this, I can play this pretty well on the banjo. I've actually played this publicly before. And yeah, why don't I I'll record this. I'll do this and just have my own little banjo feature. I was kind of hoarding this tune. I found a really cool tuning. I didn't invent it. It obviously exists, but I found that this particular tuning really suited this tune really well. And I thought, oh, yeah, this is my discovery or something. I've just felt very proud of it and I was very much hoarding the tune and not wanting anyone else to have it. And then I heard Brad play in person once, and I'm like, well, who am I kidding? This is
The balloon popped, huh?
it was
Oh,
a
never mind.
violent burst of reality, and Brad is so terrific. And then he has the gourd banjo option that's fretless.
That's impressive. I hadn't realized that the neck was fretless. Wow.
It's fretless. He's a really gifted musician, and it was a kind of a strange tune for him. I think it's so angular. A lot of Scottish tunes are, and it wasn't immediately an obvious. The melodic pattern wasn't really that typically Southern, but he, of course, picked it up very quickly, nonetheless, and put his own fingerprints on it that are way better than anything I would have done. But he retained the tuning pattern that I really wanted, and I'm so glad he agreed to play it and record it.
Which is a funky tuning pattern. For anybody who plays guitar, they're probably going to be familiar with drop D tuning. This is like drop everything tuning. Like you move everything around.
Well, and what I so love about it is often there's a very common tuning on the banjo called mountain minor.
No, Tim, I think you actually have to leave one of those strings untuned for the mountain in the mountain minor to be accurate.
Trust me, it's not ever going to be in tune. But, you can edit this part out.
No
So usually in the mountain minor tuning, you have A, D, G, and back to A. A, D, G. Yeah, A, D, G, A. I think that's it. And the drone would be another A.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, no, an E.
Oh, okay.
So, I think when I originally tried this tune, that's the common drone string. It's very harmonic, a very obvious drone note for a tune that's an A. However, having heard the odd banjo player, namely Pete Sutherland being one of them, playing in this tuning, where the drone is actually the seventh. That would be like tuning one of our drones to our high G on our chanter.
Which sounds horrible. That sounds like, why would you ever do that?
Exactly, but listen. There's this unsettledness to it, but it's really quite a beautiful,
Right, that sounds so nice.
a really beautiful effect.
Yeah.
And once I put that tuning with that tune, I thought, well, this is gold. And then you hand it over to Brad, and that is my absolute favorite track on the album, is that particular one. And the gourd banjo just has its own resonance and rusticness to it, and the fretless aspect too is just really, really pretty.
Yeah, and impressive. My goodness, I remember watching a fretless bass player play with Paul Simon, and just how such accuracy, man.
I know,
just amazing.
I know. Yeah, it's a wonder.
So Tim, I told you in the lead up to doing this interview that like it would be hard for me to not talk for a long time about every single track. I'm trying to hold back a little bit here because I am taking a lot of your time, and once I've added tracks in, this is going to be a long episode. So maybe we start looking for home, a place to land. Any other tracks or aspects you'd like to talk about before we do come to an end?
It could just be the title track in a way.
That's kind of where I was hoping we could land to. Maybe even that Pete Seeger quote, the why you named the album this and stuff like that too.
Yeah, exactly. So here's where I may divulge the origin tune for this one, which was the Desperate Battle, Pibroch. Any Highland piper who has played any Pibroch will know the melody that became this waltz, and will know that it came from that Pibroch. We hardly changed any notes from that. We just added some rhythm, some waltz rhythm to it, essentially, and a few little changes. So the Desperate Battle is also known as the Desperate Battle of the Birds, or sometimes just the Birds' Fight,
I didn't
which
know that.
we think is a mistranslation of the original Gaelic, and that it originally had nothing to do with birds, but actually a town name that is similar to the word for birds in Gaelic, in Scots Gaelic. But people may want to double check that may be inaccurate, but that's my understanding at this moment anyway.
Well, it serves
So
the purposes at hand, though, doesn't it?
yes, and exactly. And I thought, well, the mood, the emotion of this tune in no way resembles, in its current waltz form, in the Appalachian style form, in no way resembles any violence at all, any desperation or any battle, any birds duking it out or anything. So I just thought, what's a really close title that might better match the feeling of this tune? And The Bird's Flight was fairly obvious contender. Pete and Brad seem to like that. It's a very simple, no frills title, but it links to the original tune, but also conveys the overarching thesis of this particular project, which is tunes migrating, basically, coming over the Atlantic in one way or another, and setting up a new nest, a new home somewhere, and having the influences of the new land, the new cultures, the new landscapes, all affect that bird and what it becomes and how it lives. So this tune really does largely encapsulate that. A Scottish Pibroch tune becoming a waltz of the southern, in the style of a southern tune, of an Appalachian tune, maybe.
Yeah.
With a fiddle being played in a very southern way, and a gourd banjo, and then we throw in the pipes. The pipes come in partway through.
Yeah.
We enjoyed putting this track together, and it seemed like a fitting contender to be the title track as well.
Yeah. Oh, lovely. And that's probably the perfect spot to fade into